Okay, chapter 2, Mishnah 14. Reb Loza Omer, Hafe Shokod Lilmo Torah. You should be vigilant and diligent when you study Torah. What does that mean? Meaning you should be fully immersed on an ongoing basis, not haphazard. One day yes, one not. You're on a continuum to study Torah. Then he says, you should know what to respond to a heretic. But most people, they believe that position, especially in theology, is correct. Belief of God. Usually questions turn into answers. I'll give you an example. I used to have many conversations with our old buddy, and was a very smart guy, very smart. He was a fierce debater to the point that if you weren't solidly rooted in where you are, he could bowl you right over. That's how fierce he was in his ability to argue and disagree. And he'd come at you at every point, in every direction. And I felt myself that if I wouldn't have been rooted in my studies and my understanding, my beliefs as I was, he could have actually created doubt in my mind because of his position. That his position was so direct and so confirmed in his mind that he was right. But ultimately, if you have a cedar tree, if you have a majestic tree, it's as wide as a roadway. But if you start chopping at the bottom part of that tree, it's just a question of time before that tree topples on its own weight. Just have to keep hacking away at the bottom of the tree. For a number of years, I hacked away at him. I did more than hack away. And ultimately, he said to me, but I have this is my position because, and this is my position because, then what were all his positions based upon? He had questions, and because he did not have answers, the questions were a confirmation that his perception is correct. If there is a God, why? If there's a God, why is this and why is that? So if you don't have any answers to any of those questions, what's your conclusion? Evidently, there's no God. I think everything's random. So I said to him, you had no answers, but I could tell you for every question you have, I have 6 answers. So if that's the case, immediately, position is what? Has no basis for any longer. Because if the basis is because you didn't have the answer, therefore, but if I have answers for you, there's no therefore. But how do you have the answer? As much as a person's unlearned, but he's no fool. You can't just push a person off with an answer unless it's rooted in definitely in authentic sources and has to be intellectually well-founded. Otherwise, he could just brush you away. And only because I have a background in many things, I was able not only to hold my ground, I was able to refute him on every level. And he no longer had the therefore, because the therefore was only because he had a question. But the moment you answer the question, whether he agrees to the answer or not, Therefore is not the same therefore. Nobody was able to give me an answer. Therefore, I'll give you 6 answers. You don't like my answers, doesn't make a difference, but there's no therefore any longer. Now there's a question that you rejected my perspective is really a legitimate rejection. And if it isn't, you have no therefore. But what's it based upon? Have a shokod lumot Torah. If a person unceasingly learns Torah, studies Torah, and you delve and you become knowledgeable, and you go deeper and deeper and broader, you become well-weathered in many areas. And you have experience. And whenever you study, the Talmud tells us, when you study, you should always study with another person and discuss it with another person. Why? Because everybody believes, because of his own level of who he is, that it's the correct understanding. But you bounce it off a second person and you enter into a dialogue, then through the discussion and the dialogue, you're able to come to an understanding of whatever it may be. And the process of studying Torah is always with a study partner or in a group setting where a person puts out a concept and everybody discusses it. Is it cogent? Is not cogent? Is part of it correct? Does it need fine tuning? Does it need tweaking? That's the process, how you come upon the truth of Torah. But once you've been through that process for many years, you pretty have a solid foundation in all these issues, all these discussions, all these questions. As I said, as a result of that, once you have an answer, whether you like the answer or not, or have multiple answers, whether it's not according to your liking, because the moment you accept the answer, that means you're no longer dictating. That means somebody else is dictating you. And a person who all his life believed he dictates, and all of a sudden there's somebody putting a collar around his neck, it's not so simple. Therefore, he's going to resist. And he'll try to poke holes and find fault in whatever that theory may be, or that position may be. But where does it begin? Rav Kalatsky havishkod lumot Torah. And what is the result of that? Next, v'dama shetosh v'apikoros. And only once you've done that, you know how to respond to a heretic. Because since you're well versed in all the areas which the heretic only became a heretic because he didn't understand those areas, which was the cause of his heresy, you'll be able to respond. What happens if you can't respond? A heretic puts his position against an observant Jew, can't respond. You know what that's called? It's called a chil Hashem. You're supposed to be the great rabbi. So if you're the great rabbi, how do you not respond to this? You're supposed to be the expert. You should be able to back up your belief. So why can't you respond to this man who's a heretic? He doesn't believe in it. So it's only because you've studied sufficiently, therefore you're qualified to respond to the apikoros, to this heretic. But if you can't respond, it becomes a problem. It doesn't reflect well. You see? He has a question, the rabbi can't respond. So what does that say? Evidently, what the rabbi is so-called purveying over here, is trying to pass off, may not be as cogent as he wants you to believe it to be. That there's no other way to see it. Therefore, the prerequisites to everything is, how well do you study? Once you've studied at that level and you've discussed and entertained many considerations and they rejected them, now you know what to respond to the apikoros. So the Rabbeinu Yonah here writes, if you can't respond, so that means people who hear the dialogue, what are they going to say? The position of the heretical position is correct. So where are people going to gravitate to? To the heretic. He says, Yilmudu Olam Mehem, Yishtu Maim Aroa Kirosim Kinotzechu. They see the Apikoros, the heretic, is able to poke holes in the so-called truth of Torah. They say, look, evidently he's right. Nibzashem Shemaim is Chalel. So ultimately, the name of God is desecrated. Apikoros, Shebakan, who kofe b'Torah sheba'al. He's denying the oral interpretation of the Torah. He has his own way to see it. Once told of a story, a certain person many years ago, maybe 30 years ago, pretty close, had an upsharing for his son. That's when a boy becomes 3 years old, they give him a haircut. And he had it at the Yad Avram, we were in the Timeline building. And an uncle of his wife's uncle came. It was a elaborate breakfast. And then he must have been in his upper 60s, early 70s, very wealthy man, wore a little tiny knit yarmulke, not a kippah sruga. Tiny, like they used to wear these $50 size yarmulkes, kippot. And he comes, and he's wearing a little diamond ring on his pinky ring. And he believes he's a Talmud Chacham, because he has his own way of thinking things. As I say, he had a lot of money. And I met him a number of times. He says to me, Rabbi, he says, I have a dvar that I'd like to share with you. A dvar. Usually you say a dvar Torah. A word of Torah, he says a dvar. Dvar means a thing, a thought. I said, okay. While we're waiting for them to set up the breakfast, I said, okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear it. It tells me an interpretation of a verse in the Torah. So I say to him, I said, you realize what you're saying to me right now is heresy. He says, why is it heresy? I said, because Chazal, the rabbis, they interpret the verse not like you, and what you're saying, it's a heretical position. He says, doesn't make a difference. As long as it fits into the words, I think my position is correct. It's founded on the way I understand the text. What about Torah sheba'al peh? What about the oral law? To him, it was irrelevant what the oral law says, what the rabbis say. These rabbis are the Talmud. So afterwards, I went over to this person who was nephew. I said, I was wondering. When he came over to me, he says, I want to tell you a dvar. Usually he said dvar Torah. I understand now why he said dvar, because it had no relevance to Torah. That's the reason why he said dvar. But again, he says, why? Who's Apikoros? Apikoros is a person who he's a bright man, he has a way of seeing it, and he doesn't submit to the interpretations, which the rabbis claim is the transmission from Sinai. He says, I don't see why my position is not correct. Why it's not, because it's contrary to what our Masorah is, what our tradition is. So what is it really rooted in? It's rooted in what? In gaiva, in arrogance. That's what it's rooted in. If everybody says this is the Masorah, I said, to me, but it doesn't make a difference what it says. It's what I think. Who do you think you are? The answer is because you have big bucks. You wear your little diamond pinky ring. Even though in 3 years you may be in the grave, and the worms and maggots, and your kids will sell them in the pawn shop, that pinky ring. That's the end of the story. Today you go with the fancy, the hair comb and everything else. Everything begins with arrogance. Why don't you submit? People are smarter than you. Oh, they can't write the check I can write. They haven't been to where I've been. Yeah, but after you strip down to nothing, and all you're there is by yourself, what do you have to show for your life? The money doesn't exist any longer. People don't even know you. People don't want to know you. So what's your value? What's your innate value? Your dvar. If it's dvar Torah, okay, your innate value is because you're connected to God. But if you don't even have that, so what's your value? Because you were a good-looking guy 40 years ago when you were a little bit younger. But today that you're over 70, you don't have the parents any longer. You're not the hotshot anymore. Well, I still could write the check. When I go to Israel, they sing Hava Nagila, dance around. That's the way it is. When I go to the kibbutz, they don't serve me scallions and hard bread. They serve me a first class dinner. Chaim, hear that? Okay.
Just if I can ask, Rabbi, are we using a different version?
Your father could have been the greatest Torah sage in the world. Your father's wealthy, you're an heir, you inherit what he has. When it comes to Torah knowledge, or any branch of knowledge, your father could have been a Nobel Prize winner in economics and medicine and science, in any field. But unless you study, you know nothing. Just because he's your father, it doesn't come down through inheritance. Unless you pick yourself up and do what you have to do, you're not arriving. But you know something? It's not simple. You have to toil. You don't understand something. The Torah itself is not so simple to understand. Even when you study Talmud, most people, their understanding is very superficial. Today we have computer people, they have to say a lecture. The rabbi downloads it during the week. He's a great Talmud Chacham, but it's evident from the way he communicates that knowledge, he's not a well-weathered Talmud Chacham. He's just parroting concepts which he understands at a very superficial level. Because he's basically reading off a paper. But if it is so deep and so broad and so profound, it's worthwhile toil over it, to integrate it into yourself. These concepts are one of a kind of concepts. So what is the driving characteristic you need to drive you, to draw you? Before who you are toiling. You're toiling before God. He's the one, because he only releases that information to you only if you meet certain criteria. One is toiling. The Talmud tells us, you got the motzosatami. If you toil and you come upon the truth of Torah, you believe that person. Without toil, you don't come about his truth. What I mean, I'm not saying you could understand it if you don't toil, if you have a good mind. But to really fully understand it in terms of all its applications, that you're able to respond and reconcile things which seem to be contradictory. That level of understanding is only if you toil. If it's Yugata Motzosa, if you toil, you come upon its truth. How? Because understand before who you're toiling. If you show God that you value his Torah, that you're willing to toil for it, then he gives you a gift. It's a gift. It's not like other areas. You figure it out by yourself. Here, it's really because it's divine knowledge, God gifts it to you. But what do you mean? Because who are you toiling? You're toiling for God. So if God feels that you met all the basic prerequisites to be a candidate to receive it, he gives it to you. But if it's not God, you're just toiling and toiling. Who said you're right? Maybe you're not right. Maybe it's futile. Maybe it's a figment of my imagination. No, told me a person believes in God, and before who you're toiling, because he commanded you to do so. And he has all the ability to give you every level of understanding. And your employer, he's faithful and good to pay you, to reward you for your actions, for your deeds. Could you imagine working hard day and night, and you don't even get a thank you? You don't get a word of encouragement. God doesn't communicate with people. We don't live in an era of prophets. Let's say a person's doing phenomenally well in his studies. Who's telling me he's doing a great job, that he's succeeding? Your employer, your master's not here to tell you. I mean, he's here, but he's not communicating. The answer is first, look before who you're toiling. If you understand for who you're toiling because that's God's dictate. And if you believe in God, there's nothing God can't give you. But I don't see it yet. But God is faithful to his word. If he said he's going to give it, you're going to get it. Guaranteed. Like we have the Mishnah in Brachos. A mortal king, he gave you all the promises of the world. Who said he's going to live to deliver what he said he'd give you? Hashem says, you do it, you get paid. You'll be rewarded. And nothing's comparable to that reward. But I haven't seen it yet. He's good to his word. And whatever situation you're in, whether you're alive or no longer alive, the real reward is the world to come. That's the real reward. So don't think for a moment that you're being shortchanged. You know, people play mind games on themselves. And all of a sudden, you hear whisperings in your ear. Doesn't make sense. If I go work in an office, with my mind, I could make $250,000 a year. Here I'm sitting there, I can't make ends meet. And if God wants me to stay, he should provide. I'd have to struggle. That's what you're saying. Every aspect of your life, whether you struggle, don't struggle, it's predetermined, you have to struggle. And if you meet that challenge, there's nothing comparable to what the reward for that challenge is, for meeting that challenge.